The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. The defense lawyer, a towering man with sharp features and a voice that commanded the room, was delivering his final argument. The case, a high-profile trial involving a wealthy businessman accused of fraud, had gripped the nation. Every word spoken in the courtroom was being broadcast live, and millions of viewers hung on every detail. Suddenly, the sharp click of a door opening drew everyone's attention. A young girl, no older than 10, stepped into the room. Her pigtails bounced as she walked, clutching a worn brown envelope to her chest. The judge frowned, and the defense lawyer paused mid-sentence. "Young lady," the judge began. But the girl interrupted, her voice steady and resolute. "I have evidence that no one else has seen," she said, holding up the envelope. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge banged her gavel. "Silence. Who are you, and what is this about?" the judge demanded. "My name is Lily Bennett," the girl said, her voice unwavering despite the hundreds of eyes on her. "This evidence will prove the truth." She held out the envelope. "Please, you have to see it." The judge hesitated, then signaled for the bailiff to take the envelope. The defense lawyer's face turned pale as the prosecutor leaned forward in anticipation. But before the envelope was opened, the judge turned to the girl. "How did you come by this, Lily?" Lily hesitated, her lip trembling, but she stood her ground. "I can explain everything. Please just look inside." The envelope was handed to the judge, who carefully opened it. The courtroom collectively held its breath as the judge's eyes widened in shock. She looked up at the girl. "Where did you find this?" I, Lily stammered, tears forming in her eyes. "I just want to do the right thing." The courtroom was on edge, desperate to know what the envelope contained. Months earlier, life in the small town of Willow Creek had been quiet. Lily Bennett was known as the kind-hearted girl who always helped her neighbors. She lived with her grandmother, a retired librarian who had instilled in her a love for books and stories about bravery. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, Lily stumbled upon an old box labeled "Property of John Mathers." She knew the name. John Mathers was a local businessman who had moved to the city years ago and become incredibly wealthy. But his success had recently been overshadowed by accusations of fraud and theft. Curious, Lily opened the box. Inside were stacks of documents, letters, and photographs. Among them was a sealed envelope marked "Confidential." Lily hesitated before opening it, but what she found inside made her gasp. There were financial records, emails, and even handwritten notes that pointed to a massive cover-up involving several high-profile individuals. It was clear this evidence could change everything. Lily ran to her grandmother, clutching the papers. "Grandma, look at this. It's about Mr. Mathers. These papers prove." Her grandmother looked at the documents, her face growing pale. "Lily, this is dangerous. You have to tell someone who can help." But Lily wasn't sure who to trust. The news was filled with stories of corruption and deceit. She spent days researching, trying to figure out what to do. Finally, she decided to send an anonymous tip to the prosecutor's office. But when weeks passed with no response, she knew she had to act. She learned about the trial and decided to go in person. It was a bold decision, but Lily believed in doing the right thing, even if it was scary. Back in the courtroom, Lily's heart pounded as the judge examined the contents of the envelope. The defense lawyer began pacing, his face flushed. "This is highly irregular," he protested. "A child's word cannot be taken seriously in a case of this magnitude." "Sit down, Mr. Fletcher," the judge snapped. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, if this evidence is what I believe it is, it could be the turning point in this case. May we examine it further?" The judge nodded, handing the documents to the prosecutor. As he read, his eyes widened. This changes everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily stood nervously, unsure if she had done the right thing. But then the prosecutor turned to her, a look of gratitude on his face. "Lily, how did you find this?" She hesitated. "It was in my attic. I think it belonged to Mr. Mathers before he moved away. I didn't mean to spy. I just wanted to help." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The defense lawyer slammed his fist on the table. "This is absurd. Evidence from a child? It's inadmissible. Enough, the judge said firmly. We'll take a recess to review this evidence further. Court is adjourned for now. As the gavel came down, reporters swarmed toward Lily. Cameras flashed, and questions flew at her from every direction. Lily, how does it feel to be the one who could change this trial? Are you afraid of retaliation? Do you think Mr. Mathers is guilty? But before Lily could answer, her grandmother appeared, wrapping her arms protectively around her. No more questions, she said firmly, guiding Lily out of the courtroom. As they left, Lily looked back at the chaos she had caused. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She had done what she believed was right. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind Lily and her grandmother. The sudden quiet in the hallway felt almost surreal after the chaos inside. Reporters and spectators were being held back by security, but their muffled voices echoed like a storm outside. Lily clung to her grandmother's hand, her heart pounding. "Grandma," she whispered, "do you think I made things worse?" Her grandmother stopped, kneeling to meet Lily's worried gaze. "Sweetheart, you stood up for what you believed was right. That's never wrong. But now, we need to be careful. People don't always like the truth, especially when it threatens their power." Lily nodded, though the fear hadn't left her. She couldn't shake the sight of the defense lawyer's furious expression or the way everyone in the courtroom had stared at her like she was an alien. The following morning, the media frenzy exploded. Lily's name and face were plastered on every news channel and website. Headlines ranged from "Young girl could be key witness in fraud trial" to "Is Lily Bennett a hero or a pawn?" At school, the other kids whispered behind her back. Some avoided her, while others crowded around, asking endless questions. "Did you really find evidence in your attic? Are you gonna be famous? Do you think he's guilty?" Lily didn't know how to answer. She felt like a stranger in her own life, thrust into a world she didn't fully understand. Her best friend, Emily, tried to cheer her up during lunch. "You're like a real-life detective," Emily said, grinning. "Like Nancy Drew but cooler. I mean, who else can say they've helped with a huge trial?" Lily gave a small smile, but the weight of it all made her appetite vanish. "I just wanted to do the right thing," she said softly. Meanwhile, in the city, the trial was at a standstill. The prosecutor's team was busy analyzing the documents Lily had handed over. Among the financial records, they discovered a series of emails between John Mathers and several high-ranking officials. The emails detailed secret payments and cover-ups that implicated not just Mathers, but other powerful individuals. "This is a gold mine," said Aaron Hart, the lead prosecutor. "But we need to authenticate it. If it's genuine, it could blow this case wide open." The defense team, however, wasn't idle. Fletcher, the defense lawyer, was furious. He paced his office, barking orders at his assistants. "Find out everything about this girl," he snapped. "Where she lives, who her parents are, her entire history. I want leverage and I want it now." One of his assistants hesitated. "But sir, she's just a child." "Going after her?" "She's not just a child," Fletcher interrupted. "She's a threat to our case. If we don't discredit her, we're done." Back in Willow Creek, Lily and her grandmother tried to go about their lives, but things had changed. The quiet town felt less safe. Strangers began showing up near their house, reporters hoping for an interview, and others with less noble intentions. One evening, as they returned home from the grocery store, Lily noticed a man sitting in a car parked across the street. He was pretending to read a newspaper, but his eyes were fixed on their house. "Grandma," Lily whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "That man's been there all day." Her grandmother frowned, glancing discreetly at the car. "Don't worry, Lily," she said, though her tone betrayed her concern. "Let's just get inside." But the unease didn't fade. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about the trial, the evidence, and the man in the car. What if Fletcher was right? What if she had made things worse? Suddenly, she heard a faint sound outside, a car door closing. Her heart raced. She tiptoed to the window and peeked through the curtains. The man from the car was standing by their mailbox, looking around nervously. Then he slipped a small envelope inside before hurrying back to his car and driving away. Lily's curiosity outweighed her fear. She crept downstairs, careful not to wake her grandmother, and opened the mailbox. Inside was a plain white envelope with her name written on it. She hesitated before opening it, but her hands trembled as she unfolded the note inside. It read, "You don't know what you're getting into. Drop the case or you'll regret it." Lily's stomach churned. She ran back inside, clutching the note. The next morning, her grandmother called the police, and an officer came to take their statement. But the officer's tone was dismissive. "It's probably just someone trying to scare you," he said, pocketing the note. "You don't need to worry. We'll keep an eye out, but there's nothing to suggest you're in any real danger." Lily wasn't convinced, and as the days passed, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The man in the car didn't return, but strange things began happening. Their mailbox was knocked over one night. Another time, the tire on their car was mysteriously slashed. Her grandmother tried to stay calm, but Lily could see the fear in her eyes. "Maybe we should move for a while," her grandmother said one evening, "just until the trial is over." "But Grandma," Lily protested, "what if they need me? What if the evidence isn't enough?" Her grandmother sighed, pulling Lily into a hug. "You've already done so much, Lily. No one can ask more of you than that." Back in the city, the prosecution team was preparing to present the new evidence. But the defense team had their own plans. Fletcher had hired a private investigator to dig into Lily's life. What they found shocked even him. At the next court session, Fletcher approached the bench with a smug expression. "Your Honor," he said, "before we proceed, I have information that calls into question the reliability of the so-called evidence provided by Miss Bennett." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Explain, Mr. Fletcher." Fletcher gestured toward the courtroom door. "I have a witness who can shed light on where this evidence really came from." The doors opened, and a woman stepped inside. She was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a confident stride. Lily's jaw dropped. She recognized the woman instantly. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her grandmother gasped beside her. "No, it can't be." Lily's world spun as her estranged mother took the stand. Fletcher smirked, sensing victory. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the courtroom, "this trial just took an unexpected turn." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Lily's mother took the stand. Lily's stomach churned as if a storm had erupted inside her. Her mother, whom she hadn't seen in years, looked as calm and composed as ever, but her presence alone raised too many questions. Why was she here? How had Fletcher found her? And what did she plan to say? The judge silenced the murmurs with a sharp bang of the gavel. "Order in the court." "Mr. Fletcher, proceed." Fletcher approached the stand, exuding smug confidence. "Ms. Bennett," he began, emphasizing the surname. "You're the mother of Lily Bennett, are you not?" "Yes," she said plainly, her voice steady. "And how long has it been since you last saw your daughter?" Fletcher's tone carried a calculated edge. Lily shrank in her seat. Her grandmother squeezed her hand protectively. Her mother hesitated. "It's been almost 5 years. And why is that?" Fletcher asked, feigning concern. Lily's mother took a deep breath. "I left. There were circumstances that made it difficult for me to stay. But I love my daughter, and I've kept tabs on her, even from afar." Fletcher nodded, his expression sympathetic, almost too much so. "Ms. Bennett, are you familiar with the evidence your daughter presented to this court?" "Yes," she replied, glancing briefly at Lily, who froze under her gaze. "Would you care to share with the court how this evidence came into her possession?" Her mother's face tightened. The box where she found it belonged to her father. The courtroom gasped. Lily felt her chest tighten. She had barely any memories of her father, who had disappeared before she turned 3. And her father, Fletcher continued, what was his relationship to John Mathers? Her mother hesitated again, and for a moment, Lily thought she might refuse to answer. But then, slowly, she said, he was Mr. Mathers' business partner. Until he wasn't. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Even the judge leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Fletcher pounced on the opportunity. When you say he wasn't, what do you mean? Her mother looked down at her hands. He uncovered some things about the business that didn't sit right with him. When he threatened to expose them, He disappeared. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Lily felt like she was hearing a story about strangers. Her father, a man she barely remembered, had been part of the very scandal that now dominated national headlines. So, to clarify, Fletcher said, turning to the jury, the evidence this young girl heroically presented is not something she stumbled upon randomly. It was planted there years ago by her father, a man who clearly had a personal vendetta against my client. Objection. Erin Hart, the prosecutor, rose to her feet. Speculation and manipulation of facts, Your Honor. Sustained, the judge said, shooting Fletcher a warning look. Stick to the facts, Mr. Fletcher. Fletcher nodded, but the damage was done. The jury's faces showed doubt, confusion, and skepticism. Lily's hands trembled in her lap. Her grandmother whispered, "Stay strong, Lily. Truth always wins." When court adjourned for the day, Lily avoided the reporters outside. Her grandmother guided her through a side exit, but the emotional toll was evident. Lily's legs felt heavy, and her mind swirled with questions she didn't want to ask but couldn't ignore. Back home, the tension grew unbearable. Her grandmother made tea, but neither of them touched it. Finally, Lily spoke. "Why didn't you ever tell me about Dad?" Her grandmother sighed, sitting down beside her. "I didn't know how. You were so young when he disappeared. I thought it would hurt less if we didn't talk about him, but why would he hide something like this in our attic?" Lily pressed. "Why didn't he tell the police or someone who could help?" Her grandmother looked at her with sorrowful eyes. "He tried, Lily, but no one would listen. Mathers was powerful, and your father knew he was being watched. He thought hiding the evidence might protect us." Lily struggled to process it all. Her father had tried to do the right thing, just like she had, but he had paid a price. Meanwhile, Fletcher wasn't finished. In his office that evening, he and his private investigator reviewed everything they had dug up about Lily's father. They found no records of him after his disappearance, but they uncovered plenty of evidence that Mathers had connections to shadowy figures who might have been involved. "If we can link the father's disappearance to Mathers' enemies rather than Mathers himself, we can shift the narrative," Fletcher said. "This girl's story is heartwarming, but juries love a good conspiracy. Let's give them one." The next day, court resumed, and Erin Hart was ready to counter Fletcher's moves. She presented the financial records from the envelope, proving they were authentic and tying them directly to Mathers. The jury seemed swayed, but Fletcher wasn't deterred. "Ladies and gentlemen," Fletcher said during cross-examination, "consider this. Is it possible that the evidence was planted not to reveal the truth, but to frame my client?" Objection. Erin Hart snapped. "Baseless speculation." Sustained, the judge said, but Fletcher's words lingered in the jury's minds. Then, Fletcher played his trump card. "Your Honor, I would like to call a surprise witness to the stand. John Mathers himself." Gasps echoed through the courtroom as Mathers entered. He looked confident, his tailored suit and polished demeanor a sharp contrast to the storm of allegations swirling around him. Lily's heart sank. This was the man her father had tried to expose, and the man who might have been responsible for his disappearance. Mathers took the stand, exuding charm and composure. Fletcher guided him through a series of questions designed to paint him as a victim of slander and betrayal. But then Erin Hart rose for cross-examination. Her questions were sharp, probing. "Mr. Mathers, can you explain why these emails bear your signature?" "Forgery," Mathers replied smoothly. "It's all fabricated by people who want to destroy me." "And what about the payments to offshore accounts?" "Coincidence," Mathers said, his tone unshaken. "I've always run a clean business." The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Erin Hart was skilled, but Mathers was slippery. Lily watched, frustrated, as the man evaded every attempt to corner him. Finally, Erin Hart asked, "Mr. Mathers, were you aware of your former business partner's disappearance?" Mathers' expression faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "It was tragic," he said, "but I had nothing to do with it." Lily clenched her fists. She wanted to scream, to shout that he was lying, but she stayed silent, knowing her outburst wouldn't help. As the session ended, Lily's grandmother received a call. It was from Erin Hart's office. They wanted to meet privately. When they arrived at the prosecutor's office later that evening, Erin looked grim. "Mathers is a snake," she admitted. "But we're getting closer to pinning him down. Lily, your testimony might be what we need to sway the jury." Lily froze. "You mean I have to go on the stand?" Erin nodded. "Only if you're willing. It's a lot to ask, but your courage has already brought us this far. You can make a difference." Lily felt a lump in her throat. She was just a kid. How could she stand up to someone like Mathers? But then she thought about her father, how he had tried to do the right thing and lost everything. She couldn't let his efforts be in vain. "I'll do it," she said, her voice trembling but determined. Her grandmother hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Lily." That night, as Lily lay in bed, her mind raced with thoughts of the trial, her father, and what might happen next. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, a loud crash shattered the silence. She bolted upright, her heart pounding. Downstairs, her grandmother screamed, "Lily, stay in your room." But Lily didn't listen. She ran toward the noise, fear gripping her as she descended the stairs. There, in the shattered remains of their living room window, was a brick tied to a note. It read, "This is your last warning. Back off." The sight of the shattered window and the ominous note sent a chill through Lily's entire body. Her grandmother stood frozen, clutching her chest, while the brick lay ominously in the center of the room, surrounded by shards of glass. Lily rushed to her grandmother's side. "Grandma, are you okay?" Her grandmother nodded shakily. "I'm fine, sweetie. But this has gone too far." The police were called immediately. Officers arrived within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating the once quiet street. They took the note and brick as evidence, but their assurances did little to calm Lily or her grandmother. "We'll increase patrols in the area," one officer said. "But if I may suggest, it might be safer for you both to stay somewhere else for the time being." Her grandmother's face tightened with worry. "We'll think about it," she said. As the officers left, Lily stared at the shattered window, her resolve hardening. Whoever had done this wanted to scare her into silence, but she wouldn't back down. Not now. The next morning, Erin Hart called to check on them. When Lily told her about the incident, Erin's tone grew serious. "This proves we're on the right track, Lily. They're scared. But we can't let them intimidate us." "What do we do now?" Lily asked. "We keep going," Erin said firmly. "And if you're ready, we'll need your testimony sooner than planned." The day of Lily's testimony arrived quickly. She sat in the waiting area outside the courtroom, her heart pounding like a drum. Her grandmother sat beside her, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You're brave, Lily," her grandmother said. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." When her name was called, Lily felt like her legs might give out beneath her. But as she entered the courtroom and saw the judge, the jury, and Mathers' cold, calculating stare, something inside her ignited. She had come this far. She wouldn't stop now. The prosecutor guided her through her testimony. Lily explained how she had found the box in her attic, the documents it contained, and her decision to bring them forward. Her voice wavered at times, but she held her ground. "Lily," Erin said gently, "did you ever feel threatened or unsafe after coming forward with this evidence?" Lily nodded. "Yes. People started watching our house. Our mailbox was knocked over, and someone threw a brick through our window with a note telling us to back off." The jury exchanged uneasy glances. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, clearly troubled by Lily's words. Then came Fletcher's cross-examination. He approached the stand with a smirk that made Lily's skin crawl. "Miss Bennett," he began, "you've been very brave coming here today. But tell me, are you absolutely certain the documents you found were genuine?" "Yes," Lily replied firmly. Fletcher raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Because isn't it true that you're only 10 years old? Hardly an expert in financial records." Lily bristled. "I might be young, but I can read." A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom, and Fletcher's smirk faltered. "Well," Fletcher continued, "let's talk about your father. You've testified that he was Mr. Mathers' former business partner. But did you ever actually know him?" Lily hesitated. "Not really. He disappeared when I was little." "So," Fletcher said, seizing on her pause, You're relying entirely on hearsay and documents that could have been tampered with. They weren't tampered with, Lily said, her voice rising. My dad wanted people to know the truth. Fletcher stepped closer, his tone turning cold. Or maybe your father had a grudge against Mr. Mathers and wanted to frame him. Did you ever think about that? Objection, Aaron snapped, badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge said, glaring at Fletcher. Lily felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. My dad wasn't trying to frame anyone. He just wanted to stop people from getting hurt. The court took a recess after her testimony, and Lily returned to the waiting area, exhausted. Her grandmother hugged her tightly. You did so well, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. But Lily couldn't shake Fletcher's words. What if people believed him? What if they thought her father was just a bitter man trying to destroy Mathers out of spite? As the trial continued, Aaron Hart presented more evidence linking Mathers to fraudulent activities. But Mathers' defense team fought back fiercely, painting a picture of a man who was the victim of baseless accusations. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every argument felt like a battle, and the jury's expressions were impossible to read. Then, during a particularly heated session, a man stood up from the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, I need to speak. The judge frowned. This is highly irregular. Who are you? The man stepped forward, his face pale but determined. My name is David Carlson. I used to work for John Mathers. Mathers' face turned ashen. I don't know this man, he said quickly. David ignored him, addressing the judge. I have information that proves Mr. Mathers is guilty. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled to take notes, and the judge banged her gavel furiously. Order! Order! Lily watched in astonishment as the man handed a folder to the bailiff. This contains records of payments and communications that Mathers tried to bury. I was part of his accounting team before I couldn't take it anymore. Mathers' defense team protested loudly, but the damage was done. The evidence David provided aligned perfectly with the documents Lily had found, solidifying the case against Mathers. As the courtroom adjourned for the day, Lily felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The case was taking a turn, but she knew it wasn't over yet. That night, as she and her grandmother sat down to dinner, the phone rang. Her grandmother answered, and her face went pale. Who is it, Grandma? Lily asked. Her grandmother hung up, her hands trembling. They said we're not safe. The ominous warning over the phone left a heavy weight hanging in the air. Lily's grandmother quickly locked the doors and drew the curtains. She double-checked the windows, her hands trembling as she moved through the house. Grandma, what did they say? Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her grandmother hesitated, clearly debating whether to shield Lily from the truth. Finally, she sighed. They said if we don't back away from the trial, we'll regret it. They didn't say who they were, but I think we both know. Lily's mind raced. The thought of someone lurking in the shadows, plotting against them, was terrifying. But instead of fear, a spark of defiance ignited within her. We can't let them scare us, she said firmly. They're just trying to make us give up. Her grandmother gave her a small, proud smile. You're right, Lily, but we also need to be smart. From now on, we're not answering calls unless we know who it is. And I'm going to talk to the prosecutor about extra security. The next morning, Aaron Hart arranged for a police officer to patrol the neighborhood. Though the presence of law enforcement provided some comfort, it didn't erase the growing sense of unease. The threats were escalating, and Lily couldn't help but wonder how far these people were willing to go to protect John Mathers. As the trial resumed, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. David Carlson's surprise testimony had been a game-changer, and everyone was eager to see how the defense would respond. Fletcher wasted no time trying to dismantle David's credibility. Mr. Carlson, you claim to have worked for my client, yet you have no employment records to prove it. Isn't it true that you were fired from your last job for embezzlement? David's face reddened. I made mistakes in the past, but that doesn't change the truth about Mathers. So, we're supposed to trust the word of a disgraced accountant? Fletcher sneered. Sounds convenient. The prosecution objected, and the judge sustained it, but Fletcher's tactic was clear. He was planting seeds of doubt in the jury's minds. After court adjourned for the day, Lily and her grandmother were escorted home by a police officer. As they pulled into the driveway, Lily noticed something strange. The mailbox, which had been replaced after the first vandalism, was open, and there was a single piece of paper inside. The officer approached cautiously, his hand on his holster. He retrieved the paper and unfolded it. Written in bold, angry letters were the words, "You were warned." Lily's heart sank. "What do they want from us?" she asked, her voice shaking. The officer looked at her with a mix of sympathy and determination. "They want you to stop. But don't let them win, Lily. People like this thrive on fear." That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying everything that had happened. The threats, the trial, the discovery of her father's involvement. It was overwhelming. She thought about her father, a man she barely remembered. What kind of person had he been? What had driven him to stand up against Mathers, knowing the risks? A part of her wished she could talk to him, ask him for advice, or even just hear his voice. The sound of a car engine snapped her out of her thoughts. She sat up, her heart pounding. Peeking out of the window, she saw a black SUV idling at the end of the street. It stayed there for what felt like an eternity before driving away. The next day in court, Erin Hart made her move. She presented a timeline of events that tied Mathers to the fraudulent activities. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of how he had manipulated accounts, laundered money, and silenced those who stood in his way. The jury seemed engaged, but Fletcher wasn't backing down. He continued to cast doubt on every witness and piece of evidence, creating a web of uncertainty. Then, Erin called a surprise witness of her own. A former executive from Mathers' company, who had fled to another state years ago, testified via video call. His testimony corroborated David Carlson's claims and added new details about the extent of Mathers' crimes. The courtroom was electrified. Even Fletcher appeared rattled as the testimony unfolded. But Mathers sat stone-faced, his expression unreadable. During the recess, Fletcher and Mathers were seen arguing in a corner of the courtroom. Lily watched them from her seat, wondering what they were planning. She felt a strange mix of fear and determination. No matter what they did, she wouldn't give up. That evening, as Lily and her grandmother returned home, they found their front door ajar. The police escort immediately drew his weapon, signaling for them to stay back. The officer entered the house cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Moments later, he called out, "It's clear, but you need to see this." Lily and her grandmother stepped inside. The living room was trashed. Furniture was overturned, picture frames were shattered, and papers were scattered everywhere. But what caught their attention was the message spray-painted on the wall in bright red letters. "Stay silent or else." Her grandmother's hand flew to her mouth, and tears welled in her eyes. Lily felt a surge of anger. "They can't keep getting away with this," she said, her voice trembling. The officer nodded grimly. "We'll dust for prints and review the security footage. But until we find out who's behind this, you both need to stay somewhere safe." That night, Erin arranged for them to stay in a secure location. It was a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of town. Though the accommodations were modest, it felt like a fortress compared to the constant fear they'd been living in. Lily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her father again, about the risks he had taken to expose the truth. She thought about the trial, about the people who were working so hard to bring Mathers to justice. And she thought about the threats, the vandalism, and the fear that hung over her and her grandmother like a dark cloud. But most of all, she thought about the people Mathers had hurt, the employees who had lost their jobs, the families who had been swindled out of their savings. They deserved justice, and Lily knew she couldn't let fear stop her. The next morning, Erin called with an update. "We've identified someone connected to the threats," she said. "It's one of Mathers' employees, someone who's been working behind the scenes to intimidate witnesses." "Will they be arrested?" Lily asked. "We're working on it," Erin replied. "But be careful, Lily. This trial is coming to a head, and they'll do anything to win." Later that day, as court resumed, Erin presented the new findings. The evidence linked Mathers to the threats against witnesses, adding another layer to his already damning profile. But just as the prosecution seemed to be gaining ground, Fletcher stood and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but triumphant, "we have new evidence that will exonerate my client." The courtroom fell silent. Fletcher's words echoed in the heavy stillness, sending a ripple of unease through everyone present. Erin Hart shot a sharp glance toward the defense table, her jaw tightening. The judge leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Mr. Fletcher, what is this new evidence, and why are we only hearing about it now?" Fletcher straightened his suit jacket and flashed a practiced smile. "Your Honor, this evidence only recently came to our attention. It's crucial to establishing my client's innocence." The judge's expression hardened. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Fletcher. If I find this to be a stalling tactic or irrelevant, you'll face consequences." Fletcher nodded and gestured toward the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, we'd like to call our key witness to the stand." The heavy courtroom doors opened, and a tall, gray-haired man in a crisp suit stepped inside. Lily froze. She didn't recognize him, but the look of confidence on Fletcher's face made her stomach twist. "This is Mr. Richard Crane," Fletcher announced, a forensic accountant with over 30 years of experience. "Mr. Crane has reviewed the documents in question and has some shocking revelations to share." As Crane took the stand, Erin Hart stood, her voice cutting through the room. "Your Honor, I must object. This witness has not been disclosed, nor have we had time to verify his credentials or review his findings." The judge frowned. "Mr. Fletcher, care to explain?" Fletcher raised his hands defensively. "Your Honor, I assure you this is not an ambush. Mr. Crane's findings were finalized only yesterday. Given the importance of this case, we felt it necessary to present them immediately." The judge hesitated before nodding. "I'll allow it for now. But proceed with caution, Mr. Fletcher." Crane adjusted his glasses and addressed the court with the confidence of someone who had been in the spotlight many times before. "After an extensive review of the financial records presented by the prosecution, I discovered significant discrepancies that point to forgery." A gasp swept through the room. Lily's heart sank as Crane continued. "Specifically, several of the documents show signs of digital manipulation. The signatures, dates, and even the formatting are inconsistent with authentic records from the time period." Erin Hart immediately rose to her feet. "Your Honor, I request permission to cross-examine this witness." The judge nodded. "Granted." Erin approached the stand, her tone sharp and focused. "Mr. Crane, are you aware that the documents in question were recovered from a sealed envelope stored in a private residence?" Crane nodded. "Yes, I am." "And can you explain how someone could have digitally altered documents that had been physically stored for over a decade?" Crane hesitated, his confident demeanor faltering slightly. "It's possible that the alterations were made before the documents were printed and stored." "Possible," Erin repeated. "But is there any evidence to support that theory?" Crane shifted uncomfortably. "Not directly, no." Erin pressed on. "So, you're asking this court to accept your findings based on speculation?" Fletcher objected, but the judge waved him off. "Answer the question, Mr. Crane." Crane sighed. "It's not speculation, Peresi. It's an analysis of inconsistencies, which could have any number of explanations," Erin countered, "including normal variations in document formatting over time, correct?" Crane nodded reluctantly. "Yes, that's correct." Erin turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the defense is trying to distract you with baseless claims. The evidence we've presented is genuine, and no amount of smoke and mirrors will change that." The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the judge called for a recess. Fletcher and Mathers huddled in the corner, their whispers animated. Erin, meanwhile, pulled Lily and her grandmother aside. "They're desperate," Erin said. "This is a classic move. Try to muddy the waters and make the jury doubt everything. Do you think it'll work?" Lily asked. "Not if we stay focused," Erin replied. "You've done so much already, Lily. Don't lose hope." That night, back at the secure motel, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Her grandmother was fast asleep, but Lily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The weight of the trial, the threats, and the revelation about her father pressed down on her. Just as she was drifting off, A loud banging on the door jolted her awake. Her grandmother stirred, her face pale with fear. "Who is it?" her grandmother called out. "It's the police," came the reply. "Open up immediately." Lily's heart raced as her grandmother opened the door. Two uniformed officers stood outside, their expressions grim. "We need to move you both," one of them said. "There's been a breach in your location." "A breach?" her grandmother asked, her voice trembling. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated. "We believe someone compromised the secure site. It's not safe here anymore." Minutes later, they were ushered into an unmarked car and driven to a new location, a small cabin on the outskirts of a wooded area. The isolation was unsettling, but the officers assured them it was the safest option. As they settled in, Lily couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. She tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to her like a shadow. The next morning, Lily awoke to the sound of raised voices. She crept to the window and saw two men arguing outside the cabin. One of them was an officer who had escorted them the night before. The other was a man in plain clothes, holding a folder. "You weren't authorized to be here," the officer said firmly. "I don't need authorization," the man replied. "I work for Mr. Mathers." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. If Mathers' people had found them here, they weren't safe after all. Before she could warn her grandmother, the cabin door burst open. Two men stormed inside, their faces masked and their intentions clear. "Don't move," one of them barked, pointing a weapon at the officer. "We just want the girl." Lily's grandmother stepped in front of her, shielding her with trembling hands. "You'll have to go through me first." The intruders hesitated, but their determination didn't waver. Lily's mind raced. She spotted the phone on the table and edged toward it, trying to remain unnoticed. But before she could reach it, one of the men grabbed her arm. "You've caused enough trouble, kid." Terror surged through Lily as she struggled against his grip. Her grandmother lunged forward, shouting for help, but the second intruder restrained her. The sound of tires screeching outside cut through the chaos. Moments later, the front door burst open again, and Aaron Hart stormed in, flanked by two armed officers. "Let them go," Aaron shouted, her voice commanding. The intruders froze, realizing they were outnumbered. After a tense standoff, they released Lily and her grandmother and were quickly subdued by the officers. Lily collapsed into her grandmother's arms, tears streaming down her face. Aaron knelt beside them, her expression fierce but compassionate. "You're safe now," she said. "I promise." The cabin was a flurry of activity as the police secured the intruders and questioned the officers who had transported Lily and her grandmother. Aaron Hart stayed close to them, her eyes darting between the suspects and her phone, where she was making rapid calls. Lily clung to her grandmother, trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. The fear, the anger, and the helplessness churned inside her, but above all, one thought burned in her mind. Mathers had sent these men. He wasn't just trying to protect his secrets, he was willing to hurt anyone who stood in his way. After the scene was under control, Aaron knelt in front of Lily. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Lily nodded shakily. They said they just wanted me." "Why? What would they have done?" Aaron's expression darkened. "They wanted to scare you. Maybe worse. But they won't get another chance. We've got them in custody now, and I'll make sure they tell us everything." Her grandmother spoke up, her voice still trembling. "How did they find us?" "This was supposed to be a secure location." Aaron frowned. "That's what we're trying to figure out. It's possible someone on the inside tipped them off, but we'll investigate." By the next morning, Lily and her grandmother were moved to a new safe house, this time under tighter security. The house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, with police stationed nearby and patrols around the clock. Though it was safer, the constant reminders of the danger they were in made it hard to relax. Lily found herself pacing the living room, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the memory of the man's grip on her arm or the fear in her grandmother's eyes. But more than that, she couldn't stop thinking about how Mathers always seemed one step ahead. "We have to do something," she blurted out, breaking the silence. Her grandmother looked up from her tea. "What do you mean, Lily?" "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come after us again," Lily said, her voice rising. Mathers is winning. He's scaring everyone, and he's getting away with it. Her grandmother sighed. Sweetheart, we're doing all we can by staying safe and helping the prosecution. Sometimes, doing the right thing means being patient. But what if it's not enough? Lily argued. What if we need to do more? The next day in court, the atmosphere was tense. The prosecution had gained ground with David Carlson's testimony and the additional evidence tying Mathers to witness intimidation. But Fletcher wasn't giving up. He continued to hammer away at the credibility of the witnesses, hoping to sow enough doubt in the jury's minds. Lily sat in the gallery, watching as Fletcher paced in front of the jury, his voice smooth and persuasive. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, what we have here is a case built on shaky foundations. A child's discovery, disgruntled former employees, and supposed documents that my expert has already called into question. Aaron Hart stood to object, but the judge allowed Fletcher to continue. My client, Fletcher said, gesturing toward Mathers, is an honest man who built his success through hard work and determination. Is he perfect? No one is. But the idea that he orchestrated such an elaborate scheme is simply absurd. Mathers sat stone-faced, his calm demeanor giving nothing away. Lily watched him closely, feeling a mix of anger and frustration. How could he sit there so confidently when he'd done so much harm? When the court adjourned for the day, Aaron pulled Lily aside. We need to talk, she said, her tone serious. Lily and her grandmother followed Aaron to a quiet corner of the courthouse. We're making progress, Aaron said, but it's not enough. The jury is still on the fence, and Fletcher is doing everything he can to confuse them. What can we do? Lily asked. Aaron hesitated. I need you to testify again, Lily. This time, we're going to focus on your father, what you know about him, what he stood for, and how his actions tie into this case. Lily felt a lump form in her throat. You mean, talk about him disappearing? Aaron nodded. It's going to be hard, but the jury needs to understand the risks he took and how it connects to the evidence you found. It could be the turning point. The night before her testimony, Lily sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. Her grandmother sat nearby, knitting quietly, though her eyes often flicked to Lily, concern etched into her face. Grandma, Lily said finally, what do you think Dad would do if he were here? Her grandmother paused, her knitting needles stilling. He'd do what you're doing, Lily. He'd fight for what's right, no matter how scary it was. Lily nodded, feeling a surge of determination. I want to make him proud. Her grandmother smiled softly. You already have, sweetheart. The next day, the courtroom was packed as Lily took the stand. The judge reminded the jury of her previous testimony before Aaron began her questioning. Lily, Aaron said gently, can you tell us about your father? Lily took a deep breath. My dad was brave. He worked with Mr. Mathers a long time ago, but when he found out that bad things were happening, he wanted to stop it. He tried to tell people, but no one listened. Aaron nodded. And what happened to him after that? Lily hesitated, her voice trembling. He disappeared. One day, he just didn't come home. The courtroom was silent. Even Fletcher appeared to hold his breath. Aaron stepped closer. How does that make you feel, Lily? Lily's voice cracked as she answered. It makes me sad and angry, because he wanted to help people, and now he's gone. Aaron nodded. And is that why you decided to come forward with the evidence you found? Yes, Lily said firmly. I didn't want anyone else to get hurt. As Aaron finished her questioning, Fletcher rose for cross-examination. His eyes narrowed as he approached the stand. Lily, he began, his tone unusually soft. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Lily nodded cautiously. Yes. And you loved your father very much? Yes, Lily said again. Fletcher sighed. It must have been very hard for you, losing him. But isn't it possible that you're blaming my client because you need someone to blame? Objection. Aaron snapped. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, glaring at Fletcher. Rephrase your question. Fletcher tried again, but Lily didn't falter. Her answers were clear, honest, and unwavering. As court adjourned, Aaron pulled Lily into a hug. You did amazing, she said. The jury saw your strength today, and that's going to make a difference. But as Lily left the courthouse, A figure in the crowd caught her eye, a man in a dark suit, watching her intently. When their eyes met, he smirked before disappearing into the crowd. Lily's stomach dropped. Whoever he was, she knew this wasn't over yet. The man's smirk haunted Lily as she sat in the car, staring out the window. His face was unfamiliar, but the way he watched her sent a clear message: you're not safe. Her grandmother noticed her pale expression and reached over, squeezing her hand. Lily, what's wrong? Her grandmother asked gently. There was a man, Lily said quietly. He was staring at me outside the courthouse. I think he's one of them. Her grandmother frowned, her worry deepening. Did you tell anyone? Lily shook her head. He disappeared before I could. Her grandmother turned to the officer driving them. Please alert your team. Someone may be tailing us. The officer nodded, immediately radioing in the description Lily provided. But as the car drove farther away from the courthouse, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. That night at the safe house, Lily sat by the window, peering out into the quiet suburban street. It looked peaceful, but she knew better. Somewhere out there, people were watching, waiting. She thought of her father again, wondering if this was how he had felt when he tried to expose the truth. Her grandmother sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to carry all this on your own, Lily, she said softly. You're doing so much already. Lily turned to her grandmother, her eyes filled with determination. But what if it's not enough? What if they win? They won't, her grandmother said firmly, because the truth always comes out, no matter how hard people try to hide it. The next morning, Aaron Hart called with news. We've identified the man Lily saw outside the courthouse, she said. He's one of Mather's associates, a known fixer who handles problems for him. Lily's stomach churned. Does that mean he'll try to hurt us? We've increased security around the safe house, Aaron reassured her. And we're working on getting enough evidence to arrest him. Just hang in there, Lily. You're doing incredible work. But Lily couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. Every day, the trial seemed to push Mathers closer to a corner and closer to desperation. In court, Aaron continued to chip away at Mathers' defenses. The testimony from Lily and other witnesses had begun to sway the jury, but Fletcher remained relentless. He introduced new documents, claimed to uncover inconsistencies, and questioned the motives of everyone who spoke against Mathers. It was a battle of attrition, and the stakes were growing higher by the day. One evening, as Lily and her grandmother prepared for bed, there was a knock at the door. The officer stationed outside answered it, speaking briefly with someone before stepping inside. It's Aaron, he said. She's here to check on you. Relieved, Lily and her grandmother rushed to the door, but as soon as they saw Aaron, their relief turned to confusion. She looked tense, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. What's wrong? Lily asked. Aaron hesitated. There's been a development. One of our witnesses, David Carlson, has gone missing. Lily's heart sank. Missing? How? We don't know yet, Aaron said, but we suspect foul play. Mathers' people are getting bolder, and they're trying to silence anyone who could hurt his case. Her grandmother's face paled. Does that mean we're in more danger? Aaron nodded grimly. We're doing everything we can to protect you, but I won't lie, it's getting riskier. That's why I need you both to be extra careful. Don't open the door unless it's someone you recognize, and always stay in contact with the officers on duty. That night, Lily lay awake, her thoughts racing. She couldn't stop thinking about David Carlson. He had risked everything to testify against Mathers, and now he was gone. Would he ever be found? And if Mathers could make someone disappear so easily, what would stop him from coming after her next? But as fear gripped her, another thought emerged, a spark of defiance. Mathers might have power, but he didn't have the truth on his side. And no matter how hard he tried to hide it, she wouldn't let him win. The next day in court, the prosecution revealed their findings about the threats and intimidation tactics Mathers had used to silence witnesses. Aaron presented evidence linking Mathers to the man Lily had seen outside the courthouse, as well as to the intruders who had broken into their home. Fletcher objected repeatedly, but the evidence was damning. For the first time, cracks began to show in Mathers' calm facade. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his expression tense. During a recess, Fletcher cornered Aaron outside the courtroom. His voice was low, but his tone was sharp. "You're playing a dangerous game, Aaron." Aaron didn't flinch. "The only danger here is for your client. The walls are closing in, Fletcher." Fletcher smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that." As the trial wore on, Lily grew more determined. She spent hours with Aaron, helping to piece together timelines and reviewing evidence. Her insights, often overlooked because of her age, proved invaluable, connecting dots that others hadn't noticed. But with every victory, the threats grew more ominous. One evening, as they returned to the safe house, they found a chilling message painted on the garage door. "Truth doesn't save heroes." Lily stared at the words, her fists clenched. "They're trying to scare us," she said. "But it won't work." Her grandmother placed a protective arm around her. "You're brave, Lily. But don't forget, you don't have to face this alone." Later that night, Aaron called with urgent news. "We've tracked down David Carlson," she said. "He's alive, but barely." He was found in an abandoned warehouse outside the city. Relief flooded Lily's chest, but Aaron's tone remained grave. "This proves how far Mathers is willing to go. We have enough to arrest the man who took him, but we need to act fast." "What can I do?" Lily asked. "Just stay safe," Aaron said. "The trial is nearing its end, and once it's over, Mathers won't be able to hurt anyone else." But as Lily hung up the phone, a loud crash echoed through the house. She froze, her heart pounding as heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Lily, hide," her grandmother hissed, pulling her toward a closet. But before they could move, the door burst open, and two masked men stepped inside. The masked men stood in the doorway, their figures looming in the dim light. One of them pointed toward Lily, his voice cold and commanding. "You're coming with us. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Lily's grandmother stepped in front of her, trembling but resolute. "You'll have to go through me first." The man laughed harshly. "Step aside, lady. We're not here for you." But her grandmother didn't move. Her hands gripped Lily's shoulders tightly, as if her sheer willpower could shield her. "You won't touch her," she said firmly. The tension in the room was suffocating. Lily's heart raced as she clung to her grandmother's arm. She glanced toward the kitchen, where the cordless phone sat on the counter. If she could reach it, she could call for help. But the men were too close, and any sudden move could escalate the situation. One of the men took a step forward, raising a hand as if to push her grandmother aside. "I'm not going to ask again." Suddenly, a loud, authoritative voice rang out from the hallway. "Freeze! Hands in the air!" Two officers burst into the room, their guns drawn and aimed at the intruders. The masked men froze, their confidence evaporating as they raised their hands. One of the officers moved swiftly to disarm them, while the other called for backup. Lily and her grandmother sagged in relief, the tension finally breaking. One of the officers turned to them, his expression serious. "Are you both okay?" Lily nodded shakily. "We're okay. Thank you." The officer knelt in front of her. "You're very brave, Lily, but this isn't over yet. We need to get you somewhere even safer." The intruders were taken into custody, but the encounter left a lingering sense of vulnerability. Aaron arrived at the safe house shortly after, her face pale with worry. "This is escalating faster than we anticipated," she admitted. "Mathers is running out of options, and that makes him dangerous." Lily's grandmother frowned. "How much longer can we live like this? My granddaughter is being hunted like a criminal." Aaron's expression softened. "I know it's hard, but the trial is in its final stages. If we can hold on a little longer, we'll get justice." Lily's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I'm not giving up. I want to see this through." Aaron smiled faintly. "You're stronger than most adults I know, Lily. We'll make sure you're protected." The next morning, the trial resumed, and the prosecution presented its final arguments. Aaron Hart stood before the jury, her voice clear and impassioned. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the evidence. You've heard the testimony. John Mathers has spent years hiding behind his wealth and power, manipulating others to protect himself. But today, you have the power to hold him accountable." She gestured toward Lily, who sat quietly in the gallery. This young girl found the courage to stand up for the truth, even when it put her in danger. She believed in justice, and now, we're asking you to do the same. The jury listened intently, their expressions serious. Aaron concluded with a simple but powerful statement. The truth is undeniable, and it's time for the lies to end. Fletcher's closing argument was just as calculated as expected. He painted Mathers as a victim of jealousy and ambition, accusing the witnesses of fabricating stories to destroy his client's reputation. John Mathers built his success through hard work, Fletcher said smoothly. He's a man who has provided jobs and opportunities to countless people. Yet, because of envy and greed, he now finds himself accused of crimes he did not commit. He pointed toward the jury. You have a choice. Will you let baseless accusations ruin an innocent man, or will you see through the lies and deliver true justice? Mathers sat at the defense table, his expression calm and composed. But Lily could see the faintest flicker of tension in his eyes. As the jury deliberated, the courtroom was filled with a heavy silence. Reporters whispered to one another, their cameras ready to capture the moment of truth. Lily sat beside her grandmother, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Hours passed, and the weight grew unbearable. Finally, the jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces unreadable. The judge called the court to order, and the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. In the matter of the state versus John Mathers, the foreperson began, we find the defendant. The room held its breath. Guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, while spectators whispered in disbelief. Mathers sat motionless, his face pale as the reality of the verdict sank in. Lily felt a rush of relief and pride. Her grandmother hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. You did it, Lily. We did it. Aaron approached them, smiling despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Justice is served. But as Mathers was led away in handcuffs, he turned toward Lily. His calm facade was gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. This isn't over, he hissed. Lily froze, her heart pounding. Aaron stepped between them, her voice firm. Oh, it's over, Mathers. And you'll spend the rest of your life paying for what you've done. That evening, as Lily and her grandmother returned home under heavy police protection, they found the house surrounded by neighbors and well-wishers. People applauded and cheered as Lily stepped out of the car, their gratitude and admiration washing over her. A local news reporter approached, shoving a microphone toward her. Lily, how does it feel to have brought down a man as powerful as John Mathers? Lily hesitated, then smiled. It wasn't just me. A lot of people helped. I just did what my dad would have done. Her grandmother beamed with pride, her arm around Lily's shoulders. She's her father's daughter, she said softly. That night, as they sat on the porch, looking up at the stars, Lily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The battle was over, and the truth had won. But in the back of her mind, Mathers' parting words lingered, a reminder that even when justice is served, the fight for what's right is never truly over. Though the verdict was in and Mathers was behind bars, life didn't return to normal as Lily had hoped. The town celebrated her courage, and news outlets hailed her as a young hero. But beneath the surface, the tension lingered. Mathers' words, "This isn't over," echoed in her mind, refusing to let her rest. At school, things were different. Some kids avoided her entirely, intimidated by the sudden attention she had received. Others treated her like a celebrity, crowding around her in the hallways, asking endless questions about the trial. Were you scared when they broke into your house? What did Mathers say to you? Do you think they'll come after you again? Lily did her best to answer politely, but the constant reminders of the ordeal wore her down. Her best friend, Emily, noticed and pulled her aside at lunch one day. You okay, Lily? You've been quiet. Lily shrugged. I guess. It's just, even though it's over, it doesn't feel over. Emily frowned. You mean because of what Mathers said? Lily nodded. What if he still has people working for him? What if they come after me or Grandma? Emily leaned closer, lowering her voice. You're the bravest person I know, Lily. If anyone can handle this, it's you. But maybe you should talk to Aaron about how you're feeling. Aaron Hart was busy tying up loose ends from the trial, but when Lily called her, she made time to visit. They sat in the living room, and Lily poured out her worries. Mathers still has people out there, Lily said. What if they're planning something? He's in prison, but I don't think it's over. Aaron listened carefully before responding. Lily, your instincts are sharp, and you're right to be cautious. Mathers does have connections, but we've dismantled most of his operation. The people who worked for him are either cooperating with us or under investigation. But what about the ones you haven't found? Lily asked. Aaron sighed. It's possible someone loyal to Mathers might try to act out of desperation, but we're monitoring his known associates closely. You're not alone in this, Lily. We're here to protect you. Her grandmother, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Is there any way to ensure Lily can have a normal life again? She's just a child. She deserves peace. Aaron nodded. That's my goal too. But for now, staying vigilant is the best course of action. I'll make sure security checks around your home are increased, and I'll personally keep you updated if anything changes. The following week, Lily started to feel a small sense of relief. Life began to settle into a routine, and the constant media attention faded. She even started spending afternoons at the library again. Her favorite escape before the trial turned her world upside down. One day, while browsing the shelves, Lily came across an old book on mysteries and unsolved crimes. She flipped through its pages, her curiosity piqued. In one chapter, she found a story about whistleblowers who had uncovered massive fraud, similar to her father's fight against Mathers. As she read, a thought struck her. What if there's more to my dad's story? The trial had focused on Mathers, but her father's disappearance had never been resolved. Was it possible that someone else had been involved? That evening, she brought the idea up to her grandmother. Grandma, what if Dad wasn't just trying to expose Mathers? What if there were other people involved? Her grandmother looked thoughtful. It's possible, Lily. Your father was determined to do the right thing, but he was up against powerful people. I just don't know who else might have been part of it. Lily nodded, a new sense of purpose stirring within her. She wasn't ready to let her father's story end with unanswered questions. A few days later, Aaron stopped by with surprising news. We've received a tip about Mathers' network, she said. Someone close to him wants to make a deal. They claim to have information about your father's disappearance. Lily's heart skipped a beat. What kind of information? Aaron hesitated. I don't know yet. The informant hasn't shared specifics. They're asking for protection in exchange for their cooperation. Can we trust them? Her grandmother asked. That's what we're trying to determine, Aaron said. But if what they're saying is true, this could be the break we've been waiting for. The informant's identity was kept confidential, but a few days later, Aaron called with an update. We've arranged a meeting with the informant, she said. They're willing to talk, but they've requested that it happen in a neutral location. Lily's grandmother frowned. Is this safe? We'll have security in place, Aaron assured her. But this could be risky. You don't have to be there if you're not comfortable. Lily's voice was firm. I want to go. If it's about my dad, I need to hear it. The meeting took place in a nondescript building on the edge of town. Police officers and plainclothes agents were stationed discreetly around the area, and Aaron stayed close to Lily and her grandmother as they waited. When the informant arrived, Lily was surprised to see a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and a nervous demeanor. She introduced herself as Marcy Bell, a former accountant for Mathers. I worked for him for years, Marcy said, her voice trembling slightly. I knew about the fraud, but I kept quiet. I was scared of what would happen if I spoke up. And why are you speaking up now? Aaron asked. Marcy hesitated, then glanced at Lily. Because of her. I saw the trial, and it reminded me of what her father tried to do. He wanted to stop Mathers too, but it wasn't just Mathers he was up against. Lily's chest tightened. What do you mean? There were others, Marcy said. People higher up. Investors, politicians, people with more power than Mathers could ever dream of. Your father uncovered their involvement, and when he refused to back down, Marcy's voice faltered, but she forced herself to continue. They made him disappear. The weight of Marcy's words settled over the room like a dark cloud. Lily's mind raced. Her father hadn't just been fighting Mathers. He had been up against an entire network of corruption. Aaron leaned forward. Do you have proof of this? Marcy nodded. I kept records, emails, meeting notes, transaction logs. I've been hiding them for years, but I'm ready to hand them over. Lily's voice shook as she asked, Do you know what happened to my dad? Marcy's face softened with sympathy. I don't know where he is, but I know who was responsible. And if we follow the evidence, we might be able to find out. As they left the meeting, Lily felt a mix of hope and dread. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. But for the first time, she felt like she was closer to uncovering the truth about her father. Are you okay, Lily? Her grandmother asked gently. Lily nodded, though her mind was racing. I think so. But I need to know the truth, no matter what it is. Her grandmother wrapped an arm around her. We'll face it together, sweetheart. You're not alone. That night, as Lily lay awake, her thoughts swirling, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it, her heart pounding. The message read, You're digging too deep. Stop now, or you'll regret it. Lily stared at the message, her heart pounding. The words blurred as fear washed over her. She had faced threats before, but this felt different, sharper, more direct. Whoever sent it wanted her to know they were watching. She bolted upright and ran to her grandmother's room, clutching her phone. Grandma, look at this. Her grandmother adjusted her glasses, squinting at the screen. Her face paled. Oh, Lily, she whispered, pulling her close. This is serious. We need to tell Aaron right away. Lily nodded, her fingers trembling as she dialed Aaron's number. When Aaron picked up, Lily quickly explained what had happened. Forward me the message, Aaron said, her voice firm. We'll trace the number and see if we can figure out who sent it. In the meantime, don't respond and stay inside. I'll send a team over to monitor the house. Lily felt a pang of guilt as she hung up. She didn't want to drag anyone else into danger, but she couldn't ignore the warning. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare her. They were trying to silence her. The next day, Aaron arrived with an investigator who specialized in cybercrimes. He examined Lily's phone and quickly traced the number to a burner phone, making it nearly impossible to track further. It's a dead end, he said, frowning. But the timing suggests it's connected to Mather's associates, or the bigger network Marcy Bell mentioned. Aaron nodded grimly. This proves we're on the right path. They're scared, and they're trying to intimidate us. But we won't let them. Lily's grandmother looked worried. What if they escalate? They've already broken into our home once. Aaron placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're taking every precaution. You're under 24-hour surveillance, and we've increased security around key locations. They want you to feel powerless, but we won't let that happen. Despite the reassurances, the threats weighed heavily on Lily's mind. She spent hours poring over her father's old belongings, searching for any clues that might connect to Marcy's claims. Most of it was mundane. Books, photos, notebooks. But one afternoon, she stumbled upon something strange. In the bottom of a dusty box, tucked beneath a stack of papers, was a small key. It was plain and unmarked, with no indication of what it might open. Lily held it up, curiosity stirring. Had her father left this behind for a reason? Grandma, she called out, holding up the key. Look what I found. Her grandmother examined it closely. I've never seen this before. Do you think it's important? It has to be, Lily said. Why else would Dad keep it hidden? Her grandmother frowned. We should show this to Aaron. She might know what to do. When Aaron saw the key, her eyes lit up. This could be huge, Lily. If your father hid this, it must open something important. She pulled out a map of the area and marked locations connected to Mather's network. Let's think this through. Did your dad have any storage units, safety deposit boxes, or offices where he might have left something? Lily's grandmother shook her head. Not that I know of, but there was a small office he used to rent in town. It's been abandoned for years. Aaron nodded. It's worth checking out. We'll go there with a team, just in case. The office was a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of town. Dust coated the windows, and the sign on the door was faded and cracked. Aaron's team secured the perimeter before Lily, her grandmother, and Aaron stepped inside. The air was stale, and the room was cluttered with old furniture and papers. Lily's heart raced as she looked around. This was her father's space, frozen in time since he'd disappeared. Aaron searched the room methodically, while Lily examined a locked filing cabinet in the corner. The key in her hand seemed to fit perfectly, and with a click, the drawer slid open. Inside were stacks of files, labeled with names and dates. Lily flipped through them, her eyes widening as she realized what they contained. Bank statements, transaction records, and meeting notes, all linking Mathers and his associates to illicit activities. "Aaron," Lily called out, her voice shaking. "You need to see this." Aaron rushed over, her expression turning serious as she examined the documents. "This is incredible, Lily. It's exactly what we need to expose the bigger network." But as Aaron packed the files into a secure case, a noise outside made them freeze. Tires screeched and voices shouted. Aaron grabbed her radio. "We've got company. Secure the area." Lily's grandmother pulled her close as Aaron's team moved into action. Through the window, Lily saw two black SUVs screech to a halt outside. Men in dark suits poured out, armed and ready. "They're here for the files," Aaron muttered. "Stay low and stay quiet." The next moments were a blur of chaos. The intruders stormed the building, but Aaron's team was ready. Gunfire erupted, shouts filled the air, and Lily's heart pounded as she and her grandmother crouched behind a desk. Aaron ducked beside them, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We've called for backup. Just hold on." One of the intruders broke through the front door, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted the open filing cabinet and made a beeline for it, but Aaron intercepted him, tackling him to the ground. Lily's grandmother gasped as a second man entered, heading straight for them. Lily's instincts kicked in, and she grabbed a heavy book from the desk, throwing it at him. It hit his arm, and he stumbled, giving Aaron's team enough time to subdue him. Minutes later, sirens wailed as reinforcements arrived. The intruders were arrested, and the files were secured. Aaron let out a shaky breath, turning to Lily and her grandmother. "You two are incredible," she said, smiling despite the tension. "And thanks to you, we've got enough evidence to take this network down." That night, as they returned to the safe house, Lily felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The files were in safe hands, but the fight wasn't over yet. Aaron had promised to launch a full investigation into the names listed in the documents, but it would take time. As Lily lay in bed, she thought about her father and what he had tried to do. For the first time, she felt like she was truly following in his footsteps, picking up the fight he had started. But deep down, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The people behind this network were powerful, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. The next morning, Lily woke to another text from the unknown number. This time, it was chillingly specific. "You found the files. You won't find him." The message sent a chill through Lily. "You found the files. You won't find him." It was taunting her, daring her to keep going while implying her father was lost forever. But something about it didn't sit right. Whoever sent it seemed to know more than they were letting on. She showed the text to Aaron later that morning. Aaron's expression darkened. "This is calculated," she said. "They're trying to control the narrative, make you think finding your father is impossible. But the files you uncovered, those might lead us directly to him." Lily's grandmother hesitated. "But what if it's true? What if he's gone?" Lily shook her head, her determination unwavering. "No, I have to believe he's still alive. He fought so hard for the truth. He wouldn't give up. And I won't either." The investigation into the files was exhaustive. Aaron's team pored over every name, every transaction, and every communication. It revealed a vast network of corruption, implicating politicians, corporate executives, and even law enforcement officials. But buried in the middle of it all was a single name that made Lily's heart race. Graham Facility, Special Detainee 062. Special Detainee? Lily asked Aaron. "What does that mean?" "It's a term used for individuals held outside standard legal processes," Aaron explained. "It means your father might not have disappeared. He might have been taken somewhere to keep him quiet." Lily's pulse quickened. "Can we find him?" Aaron hesitated. The Graham Facility is a highly classified site, and accessing it won't be easy. But if he's there, we'll find a way. The next few days were a whirlwind. Aaron's team coordinated with federal agents, using the files as leverage to pressure those higher up the chain. It was a delicate operation. One wrong move could alert the wrong people and put Lily's father in even more danger. Finally, Aaron came to the safe house with news. "We have a warrant to access the Graham facility," she said. "It wasn't easy, but we pulled it off. If your father is there, we'll bring him home." Lily and her grandmother hugged tightly, tears streaming down their faces. For the first time in years, they had hope. The operation to access the Graham facility was like something out of a movie. Aaron and her team, accompanied by federal agents, arrived at the heavily guarded site under the cover of night. Lily and her grandmother waited anxiously at the safe house, their hearts in their throats. Hours passed before Aaron called. "We found him," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "He's alive." Lily and her grandmother burst into tears, holding each other as relief washed over them. "Is he okay?" Lily asked. "He's weak but stable," Aaron replied. "He's been held here for years, but he's safe now. We're bringing him home." When the door to the safe house finally opened, and Lily saw her father for the first time in over 7 years, she froze. He looked thinner, older, and worn from his ordeal, but his eyes still carried the same warmth she remembered as a child. "Lily," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad!" she cried, rushing into his arms. They held each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Her grandmother joined the embrace, sobbing as she whispered, "You're home. You're finally home." Over the next few days, Lily's father recounted his harrowing experience. He had been abducted by Mather's network after refusing to back down, taken to the Graham facility, and held in isolation. He had no idea who was behind his eventual rescue, but when he heard Lily's name, his pride was immeasurable. "You did it," he said, holding Lily's hand. "You finished what I started. You were braver than I ever was." Lily shook her head. "I just wanted to make you proud." "You've done more than that," he said, his voice breaking. "You've reminded me why I fought so hard in the first place." With her father's testimony and the evidence from the files, the remaining members of Mather's network were dismantled one by one. Arrests were made, trials were scheduled, and the scope of the corruption was exposed to the public. The story became a national headline, with Lily at its heart, a symbol of courage and determination. One evening, as Lily and her father sat on the porch, looking up at the stars, she asked, "Do you think it's really over?" Her father smiled faintly. "The people who did this will face justice, but the fight for what's right is never really over. There will always be someone trying to hide the truth, and it's up to people like us to make sure it comes to light." Lily nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "Then I'll always fight for the truth." Her father wrapped an arm around her, pride shining in his eyes. "You already have, Lily, and the world is better because of it."